How many of us have flown in the past year? Probably a lot of us have flown in the past year. But how many of us thought about the culture of the company that built the plane while you were on the plane? Maybe a couple of us, but probably not many, because why would you think about that unless you happen to be sitting on a plane that was built by Boeing, which has had 2 plane crashes in the past year. You might have heard about those plane crashes and thought Boeing has an engineering problem, but in fact, Boeing has a culture problem. And it turns out that they're not alone. Culture is becoming a huge issue, more and more relevant every day, and for a number of reasons. For instance, how would you like to be in charge of reputation management for Boeing today? Not an easy job. All these other factors are more and more affected by culture every day. It's harder to find and keep the best employees. Mergers and acquisitions, 50 to 80% don't work as well as they should, many times due to cultural misalignment. 2 companies that just don't work well together. And how much money are companies spending on marketing in an environment that depends and demands greater and greater transparency and authenticity between what a company says they are and what they really do. Now, sometimes it's hard to talk about culture, and we understand that, because a lot of times when the word culture gets thrown out there, people think about mission statements, they think about employee perks, they think maybe about, you name it, as part of culture. Best places to work awards. Those things are not culture, or maybe they're a small, small part. But culture really is more about what we tolerate as an organization. Those invisible and unwritten rules of engagement that we all know are there, but nobody talks about them. And just plain what it feels like to go to work somewhere. That's what culture is. And we believe culture is a lever. We believe culture should never be an afterthought, because culture ties directly to business results. We believe it to be a competitive advantage. And study after study has shown that businesses that have great cultures have the best results. So we believe culture should never be left to chance, but rather it's something that can be measured and can be led intentionally to create results. How do we do it? So Culture Talk is a little bit different. It is a human framework, as you say here. It's a survey system, but a survey system that is based on a very old principle, the principle of 12 archetypes. That's something that was first introduced to the world by the psychiatrist Carl Jung, but he was not the first one to invent it. That was something that's existed through time. And it says basically there are 12 archetypes throughout humanity. And the archetypes can be recognized and utilized in a number of different ways. It is recognized across generations. It can be related to by people in the US, outside the US, and across all socioeconomic groups. And one of the most interesting parts about the archetype system is it is sticky and memorable. Anybody here ever taken another survey and got their results? But if I asked you today to tell me exactly what you are, you would have a hard time getting those letters out. A few of us, right? I was just speaking to Noelle from Capital Bank beforehand. She said, I just took a survey. I said, what'd you find? She said, I'm not sure. It had some letters. A, B, C, D dash something. She wasn't sure, because a lot of times those surveys have great information, but they are hard to take with you. Cultural Talk is memorable, because you may struggle to remember what series of letters you are, but when people find out that they are a hero or an explorer or a revolutionary, people connect to that. They say, yes, that's me. And they remember it. They take it with them. And that means what they learn from taking the survey stays with them and can be used for years and years. So it makes it a little bit different. Culture Talk is primarily a survey system. The surveys are taken by an engaging online platform, and there's 2 main surveys, the individual and the organizational survey. And there's a lot of information on this slide. I'm just going to touch on some basics. First of all, let's talk about the organizational survey. This is a survey that an organization could use, and everybody in the organization takes the survey, and they answer questions about the organization. A trained facilitator then works with the organization and the results to determine the organization's archetypes. Once we have that information, the facilitator can help the organization with branding, with mergers, with culture shifts. Case study, a trucking company named Nussbaum Trucking, based in the Midwest. They were having trouble with employee retention. They had high turnover, which is typical in the trucking industry. So they worked with Culture Talk and defined their archetype. Turns out they related to something called an innocent archetype. The innocent archetype puts values first, values above almost everything. And they said, yes, that's us, that's who we are. And so what did they do with that knowledge? They used it to change their messaging, both externally and internally, and they used it for their branding. They took their trucks driving up and down the highway, and instead of having regular trucks, they threw this on there. And you might say, well, how does that help employment? How does that help retention? Because anybody who was a truck driver and saw that and said, that's me, there's really only one place for them to work, and that's Nussbaum Trucking. And the people who were there that said, yes, this is us, there's nowhere else for them to go. They wanted to stay at that because that resonated with them. The results, their turnover decreased dramatically. In fact, it got to under 30% in an industry where turnover is usually over 100%. And they were named one of the best fleets to drive for in the company. Again, this is a real financial result. The second type of survey is the individual profile. This is taken by individuals. Either can be one person, or a company can have everybody in a department, everybody in the company take the survey. And the results can be used for performance management, to help with leadership, also to resolve conflicts. And let's say a company had people take the individual survey. The team leader would see results like this and would be able to very quickly tell what archetype seemed to work well on his team, and maybe if there was any sort of missing energy. And be able to, again, use his messaging aligned to what he learned about the archetypes to really relate to his employees. Key to this are the Culture Talk certified partners. There's a few of us in the room, actually, and I am fortunate to be and happy to be a Culture Talk certified partner myself. We are the people who are the boots on the ground, so to speak, delivering Culture Talk with clients. And also part of the system that drives sales and revenue. So the system is actually sort of simple. We've got our consultants represented by the blue circles. The consultants go out there and purchase the surveys from Culture Talk. So we have a client, we want to use Culture Talk, we go buy surveys, either individual or organizational surveys. We buy those from Culture Talk. That generates revenue for Culture Talk. The consultants, certified partners, then use the tools with their clients to generate real results. So it's really a win-win-win. The consultant wins by adding this as a tool to their toolbox. Culture Talk wins by selling the surveys, and the clients win by having a trained facilitator use this tool to achieve real business results. And there's a number on the bottom which shows you that this is a huge market, a massive market, and even the tiniest slice of it would be great and help Culture Talk really continue to grow. And it has been growing, as you can see from these numbers. Culture Talk grows every year, both in terms of scope and in terms of the number of certified partners and the number of surveys that are sold. How are we different from our competition? There's a lot of surveys out there. We talked about that. We're different in at least a couple of ways. One way is that the other vendors sell either individual surveys or organizational surveys. Culture Talk is the only tool that does both. And we're also different because the level of engagement that Culture Talk drives, the level of even fun, makes it not only enjoyable, again, it makes it sticky, memorable, and easier to implement. Culture Talk is a growing movement, not only in the US, but around the world. And these are just some of the small, medium, and large companies that have used Culture Talk and seen real results. Culture Talk has been used in everything from institutions of higher learning to international C-suite executives to local and New York City construction workers. Again, everybody can relate to it and use it. Culture Talk was founded by Teresa Agresta and Cynthia Forsman. Some of you might know Teresa as the chair of the Saratoga Chamber. They would have loved to have been here, but they are busy today actually delivering Culture Talk in another part of the country. And Culture Talk was actually something they built after building their original business, Allegory Studios, which is a branding business. Once they got into it, they saw how closely culture was tied to branding and decided to build Culture Talk as an additional set of tools to help them reach even more people. And we have some advisors, Cindy Atley, Dr. Catherine Thweet, and Amy Roman, who is with us here today as well. What do we need? We would like introductions to consulting firms and consultants who might be interested in becoming certified partners and just help in accelerating Culture Talk and getting more and more advancement. So in closing, we realize that everybody's at different parts of their journey, but we think wherever you are in your journey, you should always be thinking about culture, and Culture Talk has the solution. Thank you. Questions?
There's time for one question.
Yes.
So once a business buys the survey, is there any room for them to become recurring customers, or once they have it, they don't need to buy anything else?
That's a great question. Yes, it depends on the company, but there's always turnover. There's always changes. So really, it makes sense for them to test regularly. And they have to work with their consultant, really determining on the number of employees and the volume before we retest. It's a good question.
How about a round of applause?